Good morning, ma'am. I am Jimmy Paul Ramirez, and this is my chosen topic entitled Cubism and Futurism. So, Cubism begins in 1906 to 1914, breaking things apart and putting them back together again. Cubism is an artistic movement created by Pablo Picasso and George Braque, which employs geometric shapes in depictions of human and other forms. Over time, the geometric touches grew so intense that they sometimes overtook the represented forms, creating a more pure level of visual abstraction. Though the movement's most potent era was in the early 20th century, the ideas and techniques of Cubism influenced many creative disciplines and continue to inform experimental work. So Cubism began with two artists named Pablo Picasso and George Braque. The Cubist movement was all about fragmentation, geometric shapes, and multiple perspectives. The dimensional planes of everyday objects were broken down into different geometric segments and put back together in a way that presented the object from multiple sides simultaneously. Cubism was a rejection of all the rules of traditional Western painting and has had a strong influence on the styles of arts that have followed it. So bakit nga ba tinatawag itong Cubism? The history of the term Cubism usually stresses the fact that Matisse referred to cubes in connection with the painting by Braque in 1908, and that the term was published twice by the critic Louis Vauxelles in a similar context. So, tinatawag siyang cubism because it usually stresses the fact that it is referred to cubes. So, dun talaga nagsimula kung bakit tinatawag na cubism because it is referred to cubes. So, basically, cubism is like standing at a certain point on a mountain and looking around. If you go higher, things will go look different. If you go lower, again, they will look different. It is a point of view. Pablo Picasso and Cubism. From 1907 to 1917, Pablo Picasso pioneered the Cubism movement, a revolutionary style of modern art that Picasso formed in response to the rapidly changing modern world, in collaboration with his friend and fellow artist George Braque. Picasso challenged conventional, realistic forms of art through the establishment of Cubism. He wanted to develop a new way of seeing that reflected the modern age. And Cubism is how he achieved this goal. George Braque and Cubism. George Braque was at the forefront of the revolutionary art movement of Cubism. Braque's work throughout his life focused on still lifes and means of viewing objects from various perspectives through color, line, and texture. While his collaboration with Pablo Picasso and their Cubist works are best known, Braque had a long painting career that continued well beyond that period. When it comes to Cubism, the first artist that comes to mind is Pablo Picasso and George Braque. Most online articles devoted to this revolutionary art movement mention, if at all, George Braque as one of the founders and pioneers of Cubism. They are known as the most famous artists in Cubism era. Both of them are well known for leaving an enormous impact in arts, especially in Cubism. Hindi mo mabivisualize ang Cubism without their important contributions during that specific era. Picasso and Braque were the first well-recognized artists to do it intentionally and towards the purposes of artistic innovation. So let's move on naman sa mga famous artwork nila. Pablo Picasso and George Braque famous Cubist painting. So itong una na nakikita natin is this is what we call the Les Demoiselles d'Avnon by Pablo Picasso and The Woman with the Mandolin by George Braque. Itong una is Les Demoiselles d'Avnon by Pablo Picasso or The Young Ladies of Avnon marks a radical break from a traditional composition and perspective in painting. So, pinapakita dito yung 5 naked women composed of flat, splintered planes whose faces were inspired by Iberian sculpture and African masks. The compressed space they inhabit appears to project forward in jagged shards, while a slice of melon in the still life at the bottom of the composition teeters on an upturned tabletop. Picasso unveiled the monumental painting in his Paris studio after months of revision. The Avnon of the work's title is a reference to a street and Barcelona, famed for its brothel. And dumako naman tayo sa Woman with the Mandolin ni George Braque. So, Girl with the Mandolin or the Funny Teller is not the only one of the most beautiful, lyrical, and accessible of all Cubist painting, but it is also a valuable document of the period. It is a Cubist on canvas painting created by Pablo Picasso in 1909. So let's move on naman to Futurism, the next era, which started in 1909 to 1945. It is the artistic anarchism. Futurism or Futurismo sa Italian was an artistic and social movement that originated in Italy in the early 20th century, and to a lesser extent in other countries. It emphasized dynamism, speed, technology, youth, violence, and objects such as the car, the airplane, and the industrial city. Its key figures included the Italians Filippo Tommaso Marinetti and Umberto Boccioni. So basically, from the word itself, futurism means future. It emphasizes the dynamism, speed, energy, and power of the machine, and the vitality, change, and restlessness of modern life. Futurism is a less of an artistic style and more of an artistically inspired political movement. It is also aimed to capture the dynamism and energy of the modern world in art. So itong futurism, it is more about modern world of art. From the word itself, futurism, which means future. Nakapokus siya sa dynamism and energy of the modern world in art. Filippo Tommaso Marinetti and Futurism. Filippo Tommaso Emilio Marinetti was an Italian poet, editor, art theorist, and founder of the Futurist movement. He was associated with the utopian and symbolist artistic and literary community Abbé de Crétil between 1907 and 1908. Marinetti is best known as the author of the first Futurist Manifesto, which was written and published in 1909, and as the co-author of the Fascist Manifesto in 1919. So let's move on naman to the second artist, which is Umberto Boccioni, Futurism. Umberto Boccioni was an influential Italian painter and sculptor. He helped shape the revolutionary aesthetic of the Futurism movement as one of its principal figures. Despite his short life, his approach to the dynamism of form and the deconstruction of solid mass guided artists long after his death. His works are held by many public art museums, and in 1988, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, organized a major retrospective of 100 pieces. So si Umberto Boccioni was one of the most prominent and influential artists among the Italian Futurists, an art movement that emerged in the years before the First World War. Boccioni was an important not only in developing the movement's theories, but also in introducing the visual innovations that led to the dynamic. Emerging first as a painter, Boccioni later produced some significant futurist sculpture. He volunteering in the Italian army, aged only 33, making him emblematic of the futurist celebration of the machine and the violent destructive force of modernity. So the next slide, we will focus on the famous Futurism artwork ni Filippo Tommaso Marinetti and Umberto Boccioni. So yung una is The City Rises by Umberto Boccioni and Manifesto of Futurism ni Filippo Tommaso Marinetti. Let's discuss The City Rises. The City Rises shows that the way to promote progress and build the modern city is work. Boccioni gave innate power and energy to men and horses, praising their heroic actions. The focus is on their agitated bodies, whose muscles are extremely in tension and stretched out as if they were about to tear apart. Ito yung unang kinonsiderang futurist work ni Umberto Boccioni. So yung Manifesto of Futurism naman ni Filippo Tommaso Marinetti is published on the front page of the French newspaper Le Figaro on February 20, 1909, proclaimed the burning desire of the author and his fellow futurists to abandon the past and embrace the future. So yung manifesto of futurism, it is more about more about abandon the past and embrace the future. Kumbaga, kalimutan na yung nakaraan and embrace na natin yung future natin. So ginamit ni Marinetti itong manifesto of futurism to express an artistic philosophy called futurism that was a reduction of the past and a celebration of speed, machinery, violence, youth, and industry. It also advocated the modernization of and cultural rejuvenation of Italy. Kasi 'di ba we are all aware naman na that most artists are using their craft to express their thoughts about a certain issue. So, ayun po, dito na po nagtatapos yung aking report, hoping na maski papaano po ay naliwanagan kayo about Cubism and Futurism arts since they played an important role in our arts we can see today. Yun lang po, thank you.